each of the breakout groups. Each breakout group has nominated a speaker or a volunteer speaker, and they'll come up here. They'll go through simply what was posted in the meeting. They'll also ask if there's any additional comments from their group, and there'll be time for open questions. To stay on schedule, we want to keep each presentation down to half an hour. Certainly don't have to use that, but Mike will be on the timekeeping, so he'll signal if you're getting to the end of that. And then once we have those presentations, we'll have some closing comments and be done. So the first group that's going to present today is the infrastructure group. And the presenter is Watson Collins. Yep, okay. And he's a manager of business development at Northeast Utilities Services Company. Yeah. Service Company. Thank you. This is probably one of those things that everybody dreads getting when you speak up in these events. You get nominated to do. Thanks, Fred, for great, thanks. Excuse me, again, because at times I'm probably going to have to look up here and not speak to the microphone, so please excuse me just because we're just kind of working through this today. You guys are all familiar with the format of these things. Our session with the first category in worksheet 1 was with the utility companies. Again, you know, our group is people want to add stuff. Did I do something?
No, they're
okay.
You signal them when you want them.
Oh, okay, great. And again, if our team wants to add stuff, if I don't cover something adequately, please chip in and help out. It looks like there's microphones out there, so please chip in. As far as the utility issues around infrastructure, wow, my eyes aren't that good. So there was definitely there was 4 areas, 5 areas that we prioritized. One was around how to coordinate. Thank you. That helps. Is how to coordinate the IT systems around different EVSEs or EVSE service providers. So how to coordinate the IT systems between those. There's definitely broader issues around notification by the OEMs of where the vehicles are going to be rolled out. Was another issue that came up, and I've heard that come up in other venues before. Also around telematics with the vehicle and the infrastructure, there's definitely additional opportunities to enhance the standards work that's already going on. There's definitely enhancements that can go on and additional layers of improvements that can be made there. There's also the fourth area that got prioritized was connecting fast chargers to the system and what's the load profile those things look like. So that was another infrastructure issue. Thank you for moving forward. The fifth one we had there was we had to deal with a lot to do with the voltage support and frequency support to the electrical grid, and how utility and how electric vehicles can play in that, and what standards would support that. On the bottom of the page, we start talking around equipment level issues from the EVSE charging stations, and there was the first one that was at the very bottom of the page was the payment systems that take place for roaming that did come up as an issue. That there was some consensus on talking about that more. There was a lot of discussion around the plug and cord issues with vehicles, and it's the concrete in the ground kind of thing, and then safety issues because there's going to be cords that are in a public space in some cases for those applications, and what are the safety issues around tripping hazards and such like that, and bottles around charging stations. So it seemed to be a bit of a gap in the standards there with that. Compatibility EVSE equipment with the vehicles. There's also quite a bit of discussion around this. There's a lot of different features in the J1772 standards, functionality in those standards, and we want to make sure that all the cars and all the EVSEs, the mix and match that's going to happen in the marketplace of all the different brands of EVSEs and the different vehicles can utilize all the features within the 1772 standards. So that was a lot of discussion around that, and it's not just that the standards don't exist, it's how do we certify and ensure that that stuff exists. So, that were standards, it was at that level. There was also discussion around metering inside the EVSEs, and there's different definitions of what a utility grade meter is inside an EVSE, and the utilities have one opinion, and there's other definitions that are out there that may imply that there's that. So there's a discussion on how the metering can kind of be addressed there. And then site planning for charging stations, again, this is the vein up and prioritizing issues around, site planning and for EV charging stations. Thank you for the charging station section. And we can skip forward there, thanks. And then our group also had a section on battery switching stations. And there was 3 areas that came out for that: the battery switching stations and the opportunities for standards, the interoperability for the battery, the obvious one there, and that vehicle interface. There was also a discussion on communication between the vehicle and the battery switching station. When the battery gets pulled out of the vehicle, apparently there's some opportunity to still talk to the car, and what would that communication standard be during that scenario. And then just a big portfolio of standards around these battery swapping stations, and it's, from equipment to the how the battery gets stored and warehousing issues around that. So that was also thrown out there. And again, if anybody in the team wants to add stuff, please chime in. Feel free. I won't take offense there. So did I cover everything, folks, on that? Okay, good. And we can step forward to the next one. And then the one area we talked a bit about also is the code officials and electrical inspectors. And this really what ends up happening is on the code side, it's a lot of the stuff is actually implemented at the local level. So there's just a really lot of discussion over how the hierarchy of this work. There's still discussions about diversity factors with electric vehicle charging station equipment in the codes, national electric code. And right now we're using, from what I understand, 100% load factor, meaning that the main switch of a facility has to be sized for that load. There's no adjustment factors on that. So there's a discussion over, since there's not data now to support that it should be a different number. That's what it is for now. We can step forward here. And is there any, and how is this different for medium and heavy duty trucks or any of these code things? So for this worksheet section 1, is there any questions from me or the group that anybody want to kind of get a sense for what was described in this group here, or things you think we might have missed or additions? Okay. Oh, we got, okay. How you doing, John?
John Smart from Idaho National Lab. Can you go back to this page I talked about, the ANSI C12, was it? More, I think. Yeah, so remember 3 millimeter within the EVSE. What is the second dash there? No showstopper standard probably needed. Is that meaning that if this is not done right,
we're starting to talk through what issues have to be addressed now versus stuff. There's a lot of stuff that has to be worked on so we're ready for the future. And there was some discussion of whether that's a now issue versus something that can be addressed over time. And you're probably going to get a lot of different opinions on that specific issue, whether to address it now or not, because once you start putting equipment out there and whatever way it is, it's hard to change direction after it goes one way. So, is it going to prevent the adoption of EVs? That was the discussion was. We didn't think it's going to prevent the adoption or the acceptance. But is it a hassle if you want to address it now? It clearly is. So I think that was probably the line of where we said it's not a showstopper. It's not going to stop the adoption of vehicles, but it's clearly an issue that if it can be addressed earlier than later, it's better. Thanks. Any other questions there? That was good. Okay, so I think we're jumping to worksheet 2 now. Okay, so this is the, you guys all know you went through the same set of worksheets. Okay, great. So this is the gap analysis section, the worksheet 2 set. And so ours were all set up the same way. There's a standards category and okay, great. So what we have for the standards category, we tried to prioritize these, and I'm just going to talk about the priority ones. The other ones I think end up showing up in the notes or get summarized that way. So just in the sake of time here, the one that was a priority that people wanted to get working on was the compatibility between the fast charging DC standards. While we have the Chatham-O and the hybrid J1772 connector for the level 2 DC, so there's discussion on how to, how those two things are really compatible. So that was the first thing. If we can step forward, that'd be great. The second priority was the second item there. Is how do we certify compatibility of the EVSEs and the validation protocol. So somebody brought up that there's like a Bluetooth, when you have a Bluetooth device, you get some kind of certification from the Bluetooth Alliance or whatever the name of that organization is, and you get to put that logo on your equipment. There was a discussion of whether there could be some kind of something similar to that around the compatibility with the EVSEs with vehicles, and that they, it's not just a voluntary standard, but there's some demonstrable thing with that. And there was also put up there's that third bullet on this page for a priority of consumer information of how is this. How is the information that's going to be out there going to get to consumers that's going to be available in the systems and stuff that are being developed so that we can help consumers understand and enjoy their vehicles, electric vehicles more. So, there's some vague things that are there, in my description, but there's a number of activities around, like the National Renewable Energy Lab has a GEO-EVSE database that's trying to have a reservation system around, information around that. So there's a lot of specific activities around that, and so we can step forward here, please. And then for the customer programs, we highlight a lot of things there, and so from enclosures to chargers to what to do with recycling the batteries in the end, and education around that stuff. And energy efficiency, crashworthiness. So there's a lot of information there that we didn't necessarily prioritize any of those. And the permit by notification, that happens, and training of installers. So those are a lot of the gap areas that were identified in the education area there. Again, we didn't actually at this point assign priorities to those ones. Oh, and here's the education ones from. There's also, you see IT training there. There's a discussion of whether for IT there's no certified technicians, and is there anybody on for the IT part of these charging station systems? Do we need that kind of training and education for folks that are involved in that? And to put the mortar safety requirements, which is, when you have to put bollards around charging stations so that people aren't backing into them and damaging them and stuff like that. So there's discussions there on that one. And I think that's it for the section 2, right? And then we'll step to the worksheet 3, if you don't mind. And actually, while we step back for questions, or anybody from the group want to kick in anything else that I kind of want to breeze through? Wow. Okay. Good. All right. So this is like the big takeaways from us, and we're kind of, we summed it up. We had a little bit of a conversation that they extended longer. That's why we were like the last guys in here, I think, for lunch. Is we kind of had some extended discussion, and we were struggling around how to kind of put some brief words around it. And what it really kind of came down to for us is that electric vehicles are really an edge technology. So that's great. It's bridging a lot of the different industries, from the automakers to utilities to equipment people to a number of other folks into the world of electric vehicles. But what happens is since it is an edge technology, you've got different standard development organizations that are trying to find their way in who takes priority. So in a lot of cases, you might have clear hierarchy on standard organizations for certain industries. But what we really kind of always bumping into when we were talking about stuff in our area with the infrastructure was who's the person that's actually got the ball on this at the end of the day. And, in some cases we're saying it's here, some cases we're saying it's there, and it seems like sometimes some MDs are filling the gap, but, so the question that really kind of came there is there any way we can, kind of have some kind of coordination on the standard development organizations so that, so we know who's got the ball more clearly on some things. So that was kind of what came out of, the painful discussion for some folks sitting there and listening to it, but, that's actually what kind of came up at the end there. We went back to the important thing around the certification with EVSE equipment and the compatibility. We've got vehicles coming out there now. This is really something we've got to make sure that this stuff works. There's probably some urban legends around, the compatibility of vehicles and charging stations and control schemes and such. I don't know if they're real or urban legends, but we definitely want to work through that stuff and make sure all the control systems on the car that are out there now, the cars that are being sold now, that may have delayed charging, work with the charging station so that the charging station is still available when the car actually calls for a charge. And we're also having, definitely we want to make sure that there's standards on the consumer side of it around the IT kind of stuff, so that the consumer experience is as good as possible. There's a lot of talk about EVs being really kind of so integrated with smart grid, and sometimes you're talking about smart grid and then EVs and then EVs and smart grid, so they really do kind of intertwine with one another, and so that was another major theme that we thought that was part of the discussions of the group there. But it was a great group to have, a lot of participation from all different parts of it. So if anybody else has got stuff to add to the group or questions for the group, that would be more welcome. So, all right, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Okay, then the next group up is the vehicle group. The presenter is Gedris Ambrositis. He's Director of Environmental Affairs from the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. I hope I didn't mispronounce too bad.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. I'd like to say thank you very much to Zina Ibelich and to Jim McCabe for helping facilitate our discussion. As young groups all went through all these worksheets, you know, there's like three groups here, and they're funneling into our final worksheet, which is the recommendation, the key issues for DOE to watch out for. And from this previous presenter, who did a very good job, let me say, a lot of the stuff that group highlighted as being important is almost exactly the same things that we highlighted as being important, right down to the final recommendations. So that's going to be very interesting to see if the third group also has the same exact recommendations. So you'll see where the common threads all throughout. We highlighted in yellow the more important things for us, and hopefully we can read these. One of the first points was a roadmap of what to follow for doing these standards, something that either DOE or some other organization could set out for the way forward with EV standards. Who in the U.S. is going to take the lead in harmonizing international standards? One takeaway from yesterday's presentations is while there's a lot of U.S. regs, there's also a lot of European regulations that we all have to watch out for, especially when these vehicles are being sold all across the whole world, the same vehicle. A matrix of coordinating bodies and standard activities to harmonize where possible. Identify what the vehicle charging requirements are that pertain to the home and office. How to communicate this information to customers. And then the fifth point that we highlighted was the cybersecurity requirements, which was when you hook up a vehicle to a network, it becomes part of that network, and it becomes susceptible to all the viruses and communications issues that a computer or any other item that hooks up to the network is today. There were several groups here. There was vehicle manufacturers. The next group was for the suppliers, was for the battery suppliers. We addressed those issues too. And the third standard issues of concerns we addressed was for heavy-duty vehicles. We highlighted the more important ones in yellow, so if we can go to the next, battery suppliers. There's similar issues that we highlighted for the vehicles. But for battery manufacturers, the hazard of the battery is not just when the battery is inside of a vehicle, installed in the vehicle. You have all the where the battery has been from its creation, the storage facility, the transportation facilities. You have to address the safety perspectives for the battery. One of the examples was what happens when a forklift truck is driven through the side of a battery. The second point that was highlighted were the actual transportation issues, the regulations that are already in place right now for air transport. It was highlighted that right now batteries have to be transported separate from the vehicles, and that they have to be married together at the point of sale. And that just does not make any sense, so there needs to be standards for that one. And repurposing the second life for batteries, this is for what you do after the exhausted life with the vehicles. Do they go into utility grade uses? Do you take the batteries apart and repurpose them for other uses? That was highlighted as another important area for standards. Going on to the next one for
heavy-duty trucks. Vehicle component manufacturers, this is a subset of the batteries and other components that go onto the vehicles. One item highlighted was if a component, especially in the networking areas, if a new component is inserted, how to make sure that it's not a malicious component, how to make sure that it will work, and a roadmap that would be helpful at the vehicle level, at the higher level, would be helpful for component level standardization going forward also. And then the final identification of standards was for heavy-duty and medium-duty trucks. As hybridization gets extended to heavy-duty vehicles, what about the onboard computer diagnostics requirements for these vehicles? Perhaps the vehicle left the factory without the hybrid part of it. What if the hybrid part gets added to it out in the field? How do you handle that whole area of OBD, onboard diagnostics? And then another area for heavy-duty vehicles was the crash aspects related to batteries. There is currently an FMVSS, a Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard from NHTSA for light-duty vehicles with lead-acid batteries. This was highlighted. But what happens when you want to apply it, or what should you do for heavy-duty vehicles? So those two issues were highlighted for heavy-duty. The next part is where the group talked about the gaps, identified the gaps and the needs for actions from all those standards, and in several aspects on the standardization, on the training, and on the conformance, the certification, to making sure that actually everything works correctly out in the field. On the standards aspects, one of the main things that was highlighted is the coordination needs to be better, not more. I mean, one of the takeaways from yesterday's presentations is there are a lot of standards and a lot of standards organizations out there. We don't need that every standards organization starts coordinating. We need them to all coordinate together better. And some examples that were gone over were on the utility side, NIST and IEC have a formal coordination process for smart grid, vehicle to grid. How do we coordinate all this? Who has the authority to coordinate, and to make sure that everybody is included and all the needs are addressed? The second item that we highlighted as a need in standards was the interoperability of cars and the EVSE charging infrastructure. This is the same thing that was highlighted in the previous groups, is that if you take a car from Connecticut to Florida, you want to make sure that the charger works just as well in Florida as it works in Connecticut, and that a Chevy Volt works fine with a different brand of charger, and that all the brands are interoperable. It was highlighted that there is an SAE standard that's starting to address this. Further on was that as we get more and more EVs and the supply chain grows, that these activities have to be extended also to take care of the supply chain. As far as education programs, one of the items that was highlighted is that for technician training, for the people who work on cars, fixing the cars at dealerships, there's a whole new world here with electric vehicles. It's more of an electrician aspect, and that mechanics now need to have specialized training in the same vein as electricians do. And there was highlighted the NFPA 70 and 70E, and that there's already activities underway. And we heard yesterday West Virginia University was doing some activities in that regard. Another item that was highlighted is just throwing out names of these standards. I guess we're guilty of it too, NFPA 70E. What do you mean, actually, NFP 78E? Not everybody can know every standard and every little number of what that actually means. So should somehow better identify what actually is in each standard, what is in NFPA 70E. And the third point that we highlighted for education training is the permitting officials, the people who will be getting the permits, the electrical permits, the zoning permits, etc., need to be trained. That there's a number that was mentioned of 40,000 permitting authorities. So to give these people knowledge and educate them that there is in existence, hopefully in the future, a single model that they can all follow. But this is a training need that the group identified. Then coalescing these identified gaps and needs, the group came up with 2 points for DOE to take forward, or that we would recommend to DOE. That the dedicated projects that DOE would be undertaking to do standards is that there has to be practical projects. And one of the projects that was highlighted that DOE is doing, and it actually fits in that recommendation, is this DOE-sponsored deployment project of 9,000 EVs and 20,000 chargers. But you will learn from such projects, you will learn actual practical information that you can then use in coming up with standards. And the one shouldn't just make standards for standard's sake, but it should be relevant to what is going forward. And the actual projects like that are the way to do it. The second point was for DOE was to understand the hazard information about batteries and to obtain that information from suppliers. While DOE already operates a lot of labs that have a lot of information about batteries and actually they were involved in the whole effort to create batteries, so they have that expertise already, and that to use that expertise to coordinate getting that information out there is a key thing that we would recommend as a gap for DOE to do. I'm just highlighting the highlighted ones. And then we boil all these recommendations down into, I think, the next worksheet, which is the takeaways for DOE. What our group, the Vehicle Infrastructure Group, recommended to DOE to, I don't know if it's an activity that they should take away, but something that they should keep in mind. And getting back to the first presenter, this is, I think, the first point is the same one that the first presenter group had also, with the harmonization and coordination of standards. We added worldwide. DOE needs to keep this aspect in mind as it moves forward. The interoperability aspect, I think, was also highlighted in the previous group, to make sure that all the cars work with all the chargers. If a car is asking for delayed charging, that the charger understands it, that all the chargers understand it, and that all the chargers can, vice versa, communicate to the cars. And then the third is the leadership role that DOE can play for the permitting authorities, the 40,000 people that will be handling these requests for permits to install chargers. If DOE could put out a model legislation, put out a flag that everybody could point to, look at, then that would go a long way to fulfilling this third point of playing a leadership role. If there's anybody else from our group that had anything else to add, or if there were any other questions, I think we're at that point right now. And I think the point has passed. So thank you very much. Great. For the last group, which was the support services and other group, we have Mike Coop. He is a principal in a company called Hey Coop. Hi, I'm Mike
group, actually at my own company, and have a consultancy called Think Smart Grid. For some reason, I'm still identified with ANSI as myself, but it should be Think Smart Grid. So what they said, thank you. No, I mean, the point is, what I think is interesting is we've got three different groups with a broad variety of stakeholders, and I think you're going to see that we reached a number of the same conclusions that the first two groups reached. So, if we look at service technicians, the discussions that we had, I don't know if we had the most varied group of folks, but we had a very varied group of folks, which is great because we had a lot of input from stakeholder categories that I don't often bump into. So it was very informative for me as a guy that spends a lot of time working on electric vehicle standards for things like communication, to hear from folks that are worried about things like fire safety. If you look at the key things, as we boil these down to key themes, getting consistent and correct information into people's hands really ends up being a big deal. And this is education, and I think all three of our groups ended up with a recurring undertone that education needs to be better. But getting that information into the hands of the people that are going to be repairing these vehicles, people that perhaps want to work on their own vehicles. I mean, my dad's in his 70s. I think about the fact that until about 10 years ago, he changed his own oil, right? So when I look at the fact, I mean, he's not going to be out there changing his own batteries on an electric vehicle, but we certainly know that there's a hobbyist industry that already is digging into these types of applications. What do we need to do to ensure that people don't get killed, for one? Because death can be bad. The folks that are working on products aftermarket, they're not going to be trained. So where are the resources for them to be able to go out and learn some of this information? I look at a number of 1 million vehicles, 1 million electric vehicles by 2015, and I say, God, that number's really small. It really does seem like a small number to me. But then you look at that, and somebody mentioned this earlier, I think it was earlier today, that as a percentage, that's 1/200th of the number of vehicles here in the U.S. That's a really small number, even though getting up to 1 million. I mean, we're looking at that from 995,000 more to go over the next couple of years. So we've got a ton of infrastructure to build. As part of that infrastructure, how do we enable the mechanics and the service providers to be able to get those cars on the road and keep them running? So things like diagnostics, things like credentials, these are all pieces that are going to be vital. First responders, there was a story told, I think it was during one of the panels yesterday. We talked about it again during our session about how there was an electric vehicle that was on, I think it was on a bridge in New York, and they ended up finally pushing another vehicle up against it to ensure that it was immobilized because they couldn't really be sure that it was turned off. And the analogy that I draw, if anybody here is a Formula One fan, in Formula One, when a car poops out by the side of the track, there's a neutral button that the marshals, when they run on and grab the vehicle, they push the neutral button. And it does a couple of things. One, it disengages the drivetrain so you can actually push the car off the track. But secondly, with the reintroduction of what's called KERS, the Kinetic Energy Recovery System, it discharges that system. Because if the system is not discharged, you could die, and we know that's bad, right? So the ability to have some standards, perhaps it's the big red button, but an effort to try to standardize some of these issues so that first responders know, not just think, right, know that it's off, that's going to be vital. So not only is that the potential for vehicle manufacturers to instantiate a common emergency disconnect switch, but people need to be trained to know where that's at. And if I can draw an analogy, this is something we didn't talk about, how many folks, by show of hands, I actually don't, but a show of hands, how many people have on their cell phones something called ICE? Does anybody put in an in case of emergency number? Right? I mean, a few folks have done this. This is not standardized. Right? But maybe one or two of you will walk away from this and say, you know what, my spouse, my parents, my children. I'm going to put ICE in their name, so when first responders, if you're out there and you're injured, you don't have any identification, what first responders have now picked up, it's kind of anecdotally, is to look through a cell phone and to find out which entry has ICE in it for in case of emergency. Right, so it's those little types of things which might even happen informally that can end up being very beneficial. So if we roll up a theme here, it's how do we identify those hazards and what are the measures to counteract those hazards? So let's take a look at insurance companies. So if you're looking at a warehouse that is full of batteries, and again, anecdotally, I think of the fact that external laptop batteries are no longer allowed to be carried in cargo holds. Right? Why? Because they catch on fire on the airplane, and that's a really bad idea. So in an environment like this where we're going to have much larger storage capacity batteries, as those are stored in warehouses and in other places, you're going to need guidelines. So you're not just fighting a home fire, you're fighting something that really ends up looking like any other type of hazmat fire or toxic fire, and you need to know how to be able to deal with that. And let's jump forward. So there we go. So regulators. The previous speaker talked about the fact I think there's 40,000 regulators. I think there's 40,000 permits in some places that you actually have to do to get an electric vehicle installed in your garage. But things like fire protection in buildings, we need more education there, right? For the state and local folks driving through the countryside. I actually drove out from Chicago and spent a little time in the countryside as I'm passing through some of these small places that have very small firehouses that are volunteer firehouses where it's one or two firehouses for the entire county. When you think about the education that needs to trickle down to those folks as electric vehicles get out there, this is a big educational effort. But again, I think the folks in this room end up being the baseline of the foundation to do that. And then it is an entirely separate piece from that, something that's probably 180 degrees different, is we need a better definition on resale of energy. So if you are reselling energy for electric vehicle charging, are you to be taxed, or what does your tax burden look like at that point? California has actually defined, California has made some rulings, and you can find this from the CPUC, that if you are reselling energy for EV charging, you are not susceptible to tax, or at least not susceptible to any additional tax above and beyond how you get taxed in California. Anybody here from California? Okay, I lived out there for 16 years. I'm happy to not be paying your taxes anymore. Challenge is I moved back to Illinois, which is in even worse shape. Consumers. We didn't highlight education. The reason we didn't highlight education is this is really a consistent theme everywhere. And at some point, we said, let's take a look at something else here. Let's highlight other things like availability and signage for charging stations. One of the things that we didn't talk about, but that has already been talked about in a number of different places, is how do you do ADA access, right? The Americans with Disability Act to charging stations. Okay, these are going to be issues. How do you sign them? How do you make them available? And then consumer confidence. We're talking about the things that people do. And we didn't use the term idiot proof. I'll use it because I think I'm a better idiot. But you try and make these things idiot proof, but what do the codes need to look like to ensure that consumers aren't doing anything to either harm themselves or to harm the environment around them? But don't lose sight of that education point, because that's obviously vitally important, and we're going to come back to that. So standards developers. Let's jump back one. Standards developers. So if we look at terminology, different terms are being used. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I broke differently on here. So questions on terminology, we need a consistent vernacular, right? We need a standard vocabulary. What is spinning reserve? What is non-spinning reserve? And I think many of you have an idea of what that is, but it's being used in different forms. We were talking last night about IP. Intellectual property,
That protocol, okay, so that one you're never going to solve because that's an acronym that means two things, but the ability to get consistent on our terms on an international basis is going to be vital. So one of the things that I want to point out, we talked a lot about a roadmap, and I'm going to touch on roadmap here in a second, but what I think is important, and I heard the last speaker talk about this, is we need some type of a framework or a roadmap, or do we need some type of a framework or roadmap? What's important is NIST has published a standards roadmap, which is in the process of revision right now. Okay, so if you have not seen the standards roadmap, and this is for all the smart grid, this is not specifically for electric vehicles, go out and look for the NIST Framework 1.0. There's a number of us. Vashant, I think, is around somewhere. I'm around. You can grab me for more info. Stan is here. We can direct you to that. That is actually under revision right now. So if there are standards that you believe need to be considered on a national basis, on a U.S. basis, again, keep in mind a lot of other countries are looking at what we're doing here in the U.S. from a standard standpoint. Make that feedback known. Right? The comment period is open right now. But that said, what I also want to say is the roadmap that I think a lot of folks are talking about, that roadmap is going to be as market-defined as anything. We need to get these standards defined, but at some point the market is going to determine what the right thing is to do. Enhanced data collection, one of the things that gets really interesting now, and frankly kind of scary from a privacy standpoint, is there's a lot of data being collected now. There's a lot of data that can be collected in a regular petrol vehicle environment, but as we move into electric vehicles, not only are we collecting all that data, but with Wi-Fi connectivity, with PSC connectivity via a J2931 connection, communications connection, what can you do with that data? And what are the guidelines need to be around that? And then the final point here, participation, coordination, and harmonization internationally. I would like a unicorn also. I'd love to have a pet unicorn. Right? The challenge here, and you know, this is a challenge that I think each of us in the room, particularly knowing that folks have joined us here from overseas, everybody wants international harmonization, but everybody wants their way. Right? So the question is, at what point can we all agree to disagree to get standards that move things forward? Right? It's the traditional standards thrash that we all go through. Next, please. So if we look at the gaps and the needs for action, you can take a look at the 10 items that we have here. The two keys that we talked about are now, and again, this is kind of unicornish. Development of the North American Standards Roadmap to facilitate global harmonization. Would love to see that, right? But I also sit here and am pragmatic enough to say that if we look at the DC connector, we can't even get together on a DC connector worldwide. Right? We can't even get together on a communication standard for inline communication worldwide. So we're going to continue to fight these battles because each of us as stakeholders believe that we have a better way. That doesn't lessen the need to try to cooperate. It would be great if we could go to, I don't know, maybe God is final arbiter. I don't think God cares about these standards, but somebody who's this uber being, and it's not going to be the WTO. It's not going to be the UN. You might have complaints go into those places, but ultimately, those of us that are working on these efforts have to figure out a way to do a little bit of give and take. And then enhancement of standards for labeling of vehicles and components. Again, this kind of goes back to the vernacular. What do we call things and how do we call them consistently? So from a conformance program standpoint, certification and testing of equipment that references the standard has to be a nationally recognized effort. There's some great stuff that you can do at a grassroots level, and I think we've all seen, if we look at the websites out there for folks that are electric vehicle enthusiasts, there's a ton of grassroots efforts out there, and people really mean well. But meaning really well doesn't prevent people from dying, and as we have all learned, dying is bad, right? So we need a nationally recognized effort that's going to help with safety and reliability. And personnel credentialing, in fact, I think it was Al that talked yesterday about the big effort that they're doing out of, I think it was a West Virginia University spin-out, is that right? That stuff's awesome. And the ability to get more of that out there on a national and really on a worldwide basis is going to end up being key. And so if we look at gaps from an education standpoint, continuing on with the earlier theme, it's training programs, certification. There's a lot of different stakeholders that come into play here. And part of that education, if you will, isn't just for folks that are going to work on the cars, but it's folks that are going to use the cars. Well, look at the Chevy Volt ads that you're starting to see and the Nissan Leaf ads, and you're going to see it with the Ford Focus Electric and all these other vehicles out there. There is no centralized, if we look at point 6, there is no centralized, easy-to-use informational website for consumers. But if I want to buy a TV, I can go to Best Buy, and Best Buy carries many brands of TVs, and I can go in there and I can pick and choose and I can narrow down what I want. Government can't help pick sides on that by any means, but from an informational standpoint, the ability to display this, not dissimilarly to what fueleconomy.gov looks like, that might be an opportunity, either for somebody who's at a government agency right now or in partnership, as well as truth in advertising. If you read the stories on, and this is, I'm going to pick on Nissan right now, but it's only because Nissan has stuck their neck out there first and been first to market with the Leaf, and for that they should be congratulated. The range on the Leaf has been roughly advertised as about 100 miles. And what they're seeing in their real-world deployments is people are clocking out after 50 and 70 miles, and it's happening in cold climes. So no matter how much off and beta testing you do, at some point, you may end up having range anxiety. If we can get to the point where we have some type of truth in advertising, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, I don't think Nissan's lying at all, by any means. But until we get some real substantive data, and until we can roll those data sets up, it's not as meaningful. So, anybody rate the miles per gallon they actually get in their car? No, right? What was on the sticker is not what you get, but the ability to at least be able to bound that somehow is going to be very important. So as we look at some of the opportunities and roles for DOE, if there is a consistent theme here, it's in going back to what the previous speaker said, we don't need more of these efforts. We absolutely do not need more efforts. I am thrilled that ANSI has done this standards workshop today, and I'm thrilled that ANSI is putting together an advisory council. What I hope ANSI doesn't want to do is do quarterly meetings of this group, because this group is all at, myself included, well, at other standards meetings, all quarter, every quarter. Right? But so the ability to do a better job, maybe as the overseer, maybe as that Uber authority to try to provide some guidance on coordination, that would be spectacular. That would be fantastic to see. As we go down the list, if you have any questions, feel free to certainly ask any of those questions. Number 8, I think is important. I had an interesting discussion this morning with Greg. If you look more involvement in the technical advisory groups that are writing international standards, in a lot of cases, efforts that are going on overseas, we might have only 1 or 2 people involved from the U.S. side. So these are opportunities for you and for your companies. And so finally, from a key messages standpoint, we want to see harmonization, and part of that harmonization should be based on what needs to be done by priority. Europe and North America, we should really harmonize. And one of the key areas, or one of the key opportunities for harmonization is China is likely to do their own thing on a lot of standards, right? And I don't think I'm saying anything bad about or against China here. China's a huge economy, and they like to instantiate in standards things that they've developed in China. The opportunity for the U.S. and Europe to collaborate, to create, and to advance these global markets is perhaps as important to do together as a mechanism to ensure that we're not all using Chinese standards, right? Because the Chinese, by virtue of the size of their market, are going to be able to achieve scales much larger than we in the U.S. or than folks in Europe are going to be able to achieve on their own. Consumer understanding, I mean, that education, we keep hammering on that education point, as well as the training piece here. The more education we end up getting, the better. So I'm sure that everybody here we're all doing our own part to educate as many folks as possible. We're in some sense the force multipliers, but the programs that Alan and his folks are working on, and I think that a lot of other programs that are going to look like the programs that they're working on, are going to be very beneficial and are going to move not just standards forward, because we don't do standards for the sake of standards. They're going to move the market forward. So do we have any questions or any comments from any of the folks from our group? Or does everybody want to get out of here? Thank you. Thank you very much to the presenters. It's not easy to get up here and try to represent the entire group, and so, again, very much appreciated you guys stepping out and doing that. Jim, do you want to?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Energetics team, our volunteers who gave the breakout reports, as well as the scribes. I know that's not an easy job, having been there before, so let's join me in giving them a big round of applause, please. I have some of my own comments to make on what I've heard, but I just want to ask before I do that if there are any burning issues that anybody feels have not been brought to the floor at this point. And same offer on the phone if there's anybody who is. Okay, well, hearing none, I think we should actually all give ourselves a pat on the back, because it seems to me that we've all done what we were asked to do by DOE, which is to evaluate what standards, codes, and related conformity assessment programs are needed to realize the market for electric vehicles. So kudos to all of you for all the hard work you've done over the last 2 days in terms of identifying the issues. I certainly think with the notes that have been presented, as well as your written comments, we have a very good basis upon which to develop a report to DOE. I'm going to talk a little bit about actually picking up on a couple of things that Mike Coop, I think, articulated very well here in the last report. And that is, he was talking about a roadmap. And I guess I mentioned yesterday, I want to tie this together with the announcement that if we hadn't announced, I would say, back in early March, it would be a logical follow-on to what we're doing here. And that is, there's almost talk of somebody needs to develop a roadmap. That it needs to be market-driven, okay? And, you know, ANSI is about standards. We've been doing this. It's a public-private partnership, and we've been doing this since 1918. I don't want to diminish by any means my remarks in terms of all of the good work that all of these groups are doing, but I just think we need to step back a second when we talk about the unicorn. And in the U.S., we have a very decentralized system. And while I sort of appreciate ANSI being referred to as an Uber authority, I don't know that that's quite accurate, or if you went around the room that everybody would agree with that description. What we are is we're a body that coordinates where there is a market need, and we've been doing this on behalf of both the public and private sector, as I said, since 1918. We're the U.S. representative, obviously, to ISO, and through our U.S. National Committee to IEC. We accredit, obviously, to develop U.S. standards, organizations like SAE, FPA, UL, IEEE, all of whom also develop standards that have marketplace acceptance internationally. So I think it's probably fair to say that we at ANSI feel that we are in a good position to facilitate what we're hearing as the market need to develop a roadmap so that we all have a clearer sense of what's needed. Certainly, the discussion about having a matrix of all the different forms, I think, is something we've actually already started in terms of developing that. And
that is certainly doable. I think, again, when we talk about participation, coordination, and harmonization internationally, again, I think the unicorn analogy comes up a little bit. And so we have to have realistic expectations about the fact that there are competing standards development organizations, there are competing marketplace interests. And so from ANSI's perspective, again, we're all about openness and consensus-based decision-making. So we feel that we can provide a venue where the parties can come together and kind of at least, maybe in some cases agree to disagree, but certainly have a shared understanding of what everybody else is doing, and by that making it easier so that we're not having to have folks participate in multiple forums. I definitely want to acknowledge what I've heard from Mike in terms of quarterly meetings or whatever that is. On a personal level, the last thing that I want to do is have anything that's going to be less efficient for people. We all have costs and budgets and travel restrictions, so we hear you in terms of what needs to be done and the need for coordination. Again, I think one of the reasons that DOE probably came to ANSI and asked us to help them was because of the private sector element in all of this. And again, from the standpoint that this needs to be private sector driven, I don't think it's fair to think that DOE probably wants to coordinate all of this. It seems like Jim has left the room, but I think he would agree if he were here with that comment. So, and again, and just in terms of some of the things that ANSI has done, I mean, I certainly would, in other sectors, I mean, electric vehicles is one, but in other sectors where we've worked with, for example, the Department of Homeland Security on Homeland Security standards, with the Office of Science and Technology Policy with the White House on nanotechnology, with EPA on sustainable products, and with Health and Human Services on electronic health records. I mean, we sort of have a history of being a venue where folks can come together to sort of address these, provide possible potential solutions to some of these issues. And I certainly would hope that, what we've done over the last 2 days would be something in our favor in terms of, a venue where you could come to hash out these issues. So I just want to ask, I guess I have a few notes, in terms of thank yous and questions and comments, but are there any questions from the audience in terms of things that you've heard that you're kind of scratching your heads about what the next steps are? We have mentioned that we're going to establish an electric vehicle standards panel, and we will be doing that in the very near future in terms of having a next meeting. And we will, obviously, we will have all the presentations available. I need to talk to the DOE folks in terms of what's been presented here today, not yesterday. That's the easy part, but I think in terms of the notes here, coordinating that, and that will really feed into the final report that we'll have to you within about a month and a half. So, could you also remind people to turn in their sheets? Yeah, that's a good point. We do have, I know from at least 2 of the groups, we collected a number of the worksheets, so if you do have something that you wrote down that you want to be input into the report, please just leave those at the registration desk on the way out. So there are no questions, and I just want to thank again the folks from DOE in particular. Yeah, go ahead. What about some of the panels did their presentations so they would make things available for either, I think, Homeland or Prenti? Yesterday, yeah. We can have those available and post on the ANSI website very shortly. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? So I just want to thank Lisa, Zach, David Anderson, also from DOE headquarters, Keith Hardy as well from Argonne, in particular Joe Frankfurt from the Idaho National Laboratory. Jim's not here to hear my thanks, but his sense of humor and his patience and areas and his guiding hand. I'm thanking you, Jim. So I really helped make this make the progress that we have to up until now. I also thank, obviously, NFPA, UL, and Intertech as our sponsors, our media partner, cars.20petroleum.com for their support.
Certainly, last but not least, my fellow ANSI staffers who's had a hand in organizing and supporting the event and ensuring that it ran smoothly and was well attended. And I would say that if there's anyone else who you feel needs to be involved, I did hear some feedback from others in terms of, well, this group wasn't here or that. Please outreach to them, let them know about the work that we're doing, that we've started to do here over the last 2 days, and put them in touch with us. So if there are no further questions or comments, I'm going to say the meeting is adjourned. Does anybody have anything further? All right. Well, thank you all very much for your participation.